Welcome to Consulting Mastery, where we help B2B consultants master the business of consulting. I'm Carrie.
And I'm Ahmed. Join us as we explore the art of delivering outstanding client value, earning a higher income, and thriving in today's marketplace. Today on Consulting Mastery, we are going to talk about competition. Do we pay attention? Do we ignore? Do we investigate? Do we partake in corporate espionage? All that and more coming up in this episode. Before we get into the details of that conversation, if you're a B2B consultant or service provider looking to build pipeline, generate leads, attract better clients, raise your fees, and grow your business, we may or may not be able to help you. I don't know, to be fair, but we can find out by going to 90daypipeline.com/talk. There's more information on that page about how we do help clients who may or may not be in your position. And you can grab a call with our team to find out if we can help you. Carrie, let's talk competition.
Let's talk competition.
This came up on a client call earlier today. And honestly, I've got two minds about it. Want to get your take. I mentioned that we had a major competitor back in the day who, when we started 90 Day Pipeline and we started this organization, was the incumbent. They were the really only the other organization that played in this space of helping B2B consultants with marketing and lead gen and sales. And the comment I made to the clients we were chatting with earlier today was that I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to them in the beginning. In the sense of, I knew they existed. I knew they were our arguably biggest, most significant competitor. And the most significant organization in this market. But I wasn't really bothered by what they were doing, why they were doing it, how they were doing it. I didn't really try to model them or copy them or anything of the sort, really. I was really more so focused on, value creation, working with our clients, building a better product, rinse and repeat. And, 5 years later, we've now, in most respects that matter, certainly surpassed that incumbent, and are now the more significant player in the space. But didn't do it, I think it's important to note, by trying to beat them or trying to hack what they did, but do it better. And I feel like there's a lesson there.
Let's find out what it is, shall we?
What do you think?
So I want to get something out of the way right off the hop, which is, I think that people who focus a lot on their competition, and we could probably put competition in air quotes, because what is competition, right? Like there's also a question around how do you even define what competition is? But people who get too pulled in to your point, right? Really paying attention to following every move, to, trying to one up at every corner. What they're really doing is playing a zero-sum game, right? There's an underlying assumption that there is only so much to go around, and therefore I need to beat this other entity, person, whatever the case may be, in order to be successful. And to me, I think that is really the root of a problem that exists when you're paying too much attention to your competition. And we can talk about what an appropriate amount of attention is. But that underlying belief that I have to, or they have to lose so that I can win, or if they win, I am losing, that is problematic on many levels, not the least of which is your attention is just in the wrong place. So your point about knowing they existed and understanding that this other organization was out there, but not really spending a ton of time on it, is important, because what you were doing was focusing on what you can control, right? And short of corporate espionage, there's not much you can do to control what the other folks are doing in their day-to-day. And when push comes to shove, the real question is, how much does it actually matter? Most consultants are working in a space where there are more clients than anybody needs, right? And yes, I'm sure we'll also talk about your ability to differentiate yourself against everybody else. And what does that mean to your market and what does that mean in terms of who your competition is. But, I think this notion of I need to beat somebody else is problematic in and of itself.
I never saw it this way until you just said it, but you're connecting some dots for me. An over obsession or preoccupation with competition is I think a symptom of a scarcity mindset. Right? This idea that there's not enough to go around. And if there's not enough to go around, I've got to beat somebody else. I've got to take from their share in order to win. And I'm reading a quote from a book that I've been going through again for the second or third time. And it says, thoughts of scarcity take away abundance from your life. They manifest scarcity into the physical world. To avoid scarcity, eliminate all thoughts of competition and instead choose creation. From a great little book called The Happy Pocket Full of Money. If you believe the market is big and there's lots of opportunity and that your proposition is sound, then the only real data point you should be taking from competition is the fact that there is competition tells us there's a market. It's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
If you had no competition, I would seriously question whether there's a market for your services. Unless you're the first. What are the odds of you being the very first person to offer services in your market? Slim to none, right? So the fact that there is competition is an important data point. Clearly, somebody else has made a go of this and turned it into a successful business venture. Fantastic. But I'm with you on, a preoccupation with your competitors and a preoccupation with trying to model what they've done. Not only implies that you have a belief that there's not enough to go around, you've got to beat them, but also that there's only one way to do it. There's only one way to make it work. And you've got to stay as close as possible to their thing and the way they did it, but make some, some subtle but meaningful adjustments that make you better. And that somehow is going to be the path to success versus doing it your way from the beginning.
Yeah, and be very clear, if that's the path you take, you're letting them run your business in a lot of ways. And that's not why you started this, right? You did not start your consultancy so that you could follow somebody else. You did not start your consultancy so that someone else could, at arm's length, without even really knowing anything about you, impact the way that you make choices and the way that you move forward. So I want to go back to something that I touched on a little bit earlier, which was this notion of what really is competition. I think this is also important because depending on what definition you use, there's either no competition for your service, what you provide, or almost everything is competition. And so I think it's important to think about that as well, because I also don't believe that when people are paying attention to their competition, that they're necessarily paying attention to the people who are truly, the folks that you would want to understand in terms of what it is that they're doing. So tell me how you define competition.
So I think about this in terms of alternatives and competitors. So an alternative could be an alternative way of doing the thing that you promised to do, an alternative solution, which may or may not do what you do in the way that you do it, and therefore is not a competitor. Okay, so let's use our business as an example because we know our business. So we run a coaching and training program called 90 Day Pipeline. It is a done with you offer, and that it's a collaboration between us and the client. It is not a done for you offer in that we don't do it for the client. Now we compete, in air quotes for the podcast listeners, with a whole bunch of done for you options. There's the LinkedIn agency and the Facebook ad agency and the podcast agency and all these done for you, we will do it for you options. We don't consider them to be our competition in the sense of they don't really do what we do. We don't make the same claim. It's not the same thing. There are alternatives. So a client could choose to do one of those things instead of working with us. And so we need to be aware of them, but we're not competing with them, so to speak. Versus a competitor, again, in my definition here, is someone who offers substantially the same thing that you do. Like for all intents and purposes, it looks and sounds very similar out of the box. And you might differentiate yourself from them. You don't really need to differentiate from an alternative apart from clarifying, well, they do something very different than what we do. But from a competitor, you have to differentiate so that the client can then make their decision accordingly, because from the outside, it looks and sounds very similar.
And so if I'm thinking about my competition as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, who is it that I want to know about? Or should I just close my eyes completely?
So I think you need to know, and I'm certainly not preaching that you pay no attention. I think you need to know what are the common alternatives to solving the problem that you solve that are available to your clients. And we teach our clients to get this information through a market research method called customer listening, right? This is why you do market research, because you may not even be aware of all the different options available to your client because you're not the client. So you want to know what options are available to them in terms of categories. You don't need to know every firm or vendor or outfit, right? But in terms of categories, because that's who you're often, in air quotes for podcast listeners, competing with more than your direct competitors. And then in terms of direct competitors, I think you want to know who they are. Again, the premise of this entire episode for me is you don't need to know everything about what they're doing and how they're doing it and how they built it and how it works, because the more that you color your perspective with that information, the more likely you are to build an organization just like theirs, which at best does marginally better than theirs. And at worst, it doesn't do as well, even if it is better, because second place is not as rewarding as first place.
Well, and you're not coming from, I mean, if they are the people who built it a certain way, right, who created a solution in a certain way, jumping on a bandwagon is really hard to do more effectively than, the person who's really bought in, right? The person who believed it, the person who brought it to the table. And that's who you need to be. I mean, the better way to think about this, or the place where you want to end up, is you want the other folks in your market looking at you as competition. And again, I mean, we talked about the scarcity mindset. There's also a mindset challenge around chasing, right? They're already here, and therefore I'm sort of chasing them. I'm trying to catch up. I'm not quite good enough. I'm not as fancy yet, right? I'm not as big. And all of these things are, like, all of these ways of thinking are challenging because they're going to stop you from doing what it is that you need to do. And, ideally, you take a moment, you figure out who the competition is, you figure out what the other alternatives are, because there are many outside of just, hiring a different consultant than you. And then you set that aside, and you do, based on what you know about your market, what you know about your solution, what you know about the problem that needs to be solved. Your job now is just to do the best job you can in communicating that you can resolve that issue with the prospects that you're speaking to.
I mean, the fascinating thing about this to me is I can now look at, with regards to this other competitor, I know what differentiates us from them. Mm-hmm. And had I in the early days been overly preoccupied with what they were doing and how they were doing it and how they built it and how they structured it and all that stuff, I don't know that our differentiators today would have developed the way that they did. Because I would have been, in a sense, there's a natural human bias here, right? When you see something that's working, there's going to be a hesitation to veer too far off that path because it's working. Mm-hmm. They're doing it. It's working. And we see this in clients, right? When the market tells them via their firsthand customer research, the market tells them, we want this. And they go, I don't know, but nobody else is doing that. There's a hesitation, right? Because mm-hmm. if these bigger competitors who are established are not doing it, then maybe there's a reason why they're not doing it, even though the market might tell you otherwise. And so I look at what differentiates us today, and I don't know that those things would have emerged the way that they have if I was really in tune with and preoccupied with what my competitors were doing, because I would have tried to stay as close to their model as possible, thinking that that was the safer bet. When in reality, again, it would have made us really a carbon copy with some slight modifications of their organization, which would, again, being second place, it's not that glamorous.
Well, and what's interesting about that, all of this presumes that what they are doing, whoever they are, is working. Right. And, we live in this world where, as we know, right, everybody is able to put their best foot forward inside the tiny screen on your iPhone. And, it appears that something is going really well. And I think that we fall prey to assuming that's always the case, right? It's always better. The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. Someone else is successful. Remember as well that you don't know. You don't know, in most cases, how well things are going over there, right? You don't know that they're closing all these clients that you're not, and that there's some particular reason that that's happening. You don't know that they are delivering in a way that is getting their clients the solution that they need. Those are all assumptions that you're making as well. And so, if you are doing market research around your competitors, also be really careful around what's fact and what you're just supposing to be the case.
It's funny because, given our position in our market today, we get people doing market research on us, right? We get the mystery shoppers. We get the people that are trying to see what we have so they can see how they can use it, right? And we do our best to weed them out, but it's not a perfect science. And I recall one story, you brought this to my attention, that we had a former client who was going out and publishing thought leadership on LinkedIn using our very specific terminology and intellectual property. I think it was power positioning in this case. I recall you were pretty upset about it, right?
I mean, they used our graphics too, but that's a whole other story.
And and my feeling on it was it's annoying. Don't get me wrong, it's annoying, right? But if the best that you got is to try to copy us, like you are the opposite of a threat, right? Like I will never take you seriously if the best you got is to go through our program, steal our IP, try to pawn it off as your own. I just can't get worried about someone like that.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and that's an extreme example, right? But your competitors probably think the same way. If the best shot that you have is to copy them to the best of your ability, but like in grade school, like do it just enough, but don't get caught for plagiarism, right? Like just like toe that line, right? Then you're not a threat to them, and they're not worried about you. I'm worried about, and not really worried in the sense of like from a are they going to steal business from us? 'Cause I think the market's quite big. But what I take more seriously rather is somebody who has actual original ideas that they can bring to the marketplace that I can't bring because they're not me. And again, I'm not worried about them. In fact, I encourage that because it's better for the market. But those people I take seriously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too. And, when I think about the consultants that we work with, you take them seriously. And also, those are folks that you probably want to know about and also know. So once you can set aside the notion of competition, right? Scarcity, win, lose. If you can set that aside, there's also a lot to be gained from connecting with those folks, right? From sending them the people that don't fit in your space. And we do that sometimes, right? We will absolutely, if we don't think that we're the right solution for somebody, we will connect them with the people in our space whom we respect, right? Who we know have an approach that works, who we know cares about their clients as much as we care about ours. And that comes from being in the space where you are confident, right? You know what you're delivering. You know what's great about it. You know who it's for, and you know who it's not for.
Well, I'll give you the flip side of that example, and we can end on this.
Mhm.
Earlier today, and you don't even know about this yet, but earlier today I was on LinkedIn and I saw a post from one of our alumni, who is a very prolific LinkedIn content creator, got started when we started working together, and has since really blown up, both in terms of revenue and scale and following and all that kind of fun stuff. And this person now has a content marketing offer where they're going to help other people with content marketing on LinkedIn, I presume. And that's fantastic. This is a client who was smart, was intelligent, who executed. I believe they, we even, did some workshops with them internally when they were in the program so we can capture some of the best practices, and did really, really well. And who has now gone on to build something of their own that's unique and original based on their experience. That's someone I want to pay attention to. They're not a competitor. They're not a threat either, right? But we want to pay attention to those people because they add, richness to the marketplace through their original ideas. And I bet we're going to have this person on the podcast sometime soon, but we'll see.
I bet we will.
So, hope that helps you folks in terms of thinking about competition and competitors. And again, make that distinction between alternatives and competitors. They're not the same thing. And be very wary of, an overindulgence in what your competitors are doing and what they're not doing, and a preoccupation with their activities at the expense of building an original business that's unique to you. If you like this episode, here's what you can do. Go on your favorite podcast player, Apple, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, they call it now, Spotify, whatever it may be. Drop us a rating, a review, helps more people discover the show, and subscribe while you're at it so that you never miss one of them.